James O'Brien. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It is 25 minutes to 1, and it is Simon Mark's time, actually. I'm a bit discombobulated, just like you are. Crikey, do you want to swap for the next 25 minutes? Some of the calls that I've taken today have broken me. I'm not going to lie to you. I know that you've been very emotionally affected by them as well, but good God, when you are reminded of the reason why we're having these conversations, I don't know quite what the words would be to describe how many of us are feeling today as a consequence of Donald Trump's latest aberration. And once again, I find my own vocabulary, which John in Switzerland was so kind about earlier, is just not up to the task of articulating some of the feelings that you and I are sharing today. Simon, welcome. We should probably begin with these comments. Do they make big news in the United States, these heinous and egregious insults against people who gave up their lives in service to a mission that was called by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States?
Well, they're certainly not making news in the United States, James, to the extent that they are obviously making news on your side of the Atlantic and also in Canada as well. Because remember, this is the week in which Mark Carney officially consigned the transatlantic alliance to the ash heap of history based on Donald Trump's actions. I would make the point that this is not an aberration by President Donald Trump. To put this to put these remarks into context, to put the trashing of the reputation of British service personnel who were slain in Afghanistan alongside 159 Canadians, 44 Danes, the highest per capita fatality rate in Afghanistan was suffered by Denmark. To put all of this into its broader context, we are at the end of a week in which Donald Trump and his top lieutenants removed the last vestiges of their mask. They are not hiding their loathing of Europe, everything that it stands for, its leaders, its economic position, and they are absolutely determined that not only is Europe now risking, as Donald Trump put it in his speech in Davos, death, or as the national security strategy here calls it, civilizational erasure. They insist that the only thing that is going to save Europe is when the voters of Europe realize that their salvation lies in the hands of what the Trump administration refers to as patriotic European parties. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been giving voice to this again in an interview that has just been posted by the website Politico, essentially saying Europeans need to look at the tremendous success that Donald Trump is having, rebuilding America, closing its borders, ending mass migration, and they need to understand that the future for them lies in embracing similar policies. So this is not a coincidental swipe at the sacrifice that was made by over 450 British families in Afghanistan. This goes to the absolute heart of US government official policy now towards Europe, which is constantly to undermine the Keir Starmers, the Emmanuel Macrons, the Friedrich Merzes, all of them, and to boost the Nigel Farages, the Marine Le Pens, the Jordan Bardellas, the AfD leadership in Germany. That is what is driving this policy, and that is why it is so important to dwell at the end of this week on what Canada has done and on what Volodymyr Zelensky did last night in Davos. Both Mark Carney and Volodymyr Zelensky saying this week, the party is over. There can no longer be any pretense of an ability to work with this president and this America. And when you ask about what people are seeing on American television, Fox News last night, and Donald Trump has reposted this and pinned it to the top of his Truth social media account, presented a 7.5-minute, I won't even call it a report, I mean, homage to President Trump in Davos that completely misrepresents what took place there and tells the audience that Donald Trump is returning to the United States as a conquering hero who has wiped the leaders' noses of Europe in Davos and has shown them what effective parenting is all about. So that's the reality that's going into millions of American homes. The largest, most successful news channel in the United States, basically portraying Donald Trump as a conquering hero as he flew back from Davos last night, while we all think, you know, he climbed down, he completely caved on the issue of Greenland and committed this absolute shameless slander against the servicemen and women of the UK and other European and indeed Canadian armed forces.
I thought I was incapable of being surprised by the events of the last 24 hours. I thought I was across them. But so you're basically talking about propaganda, entirely false propaganda being punted by Rupert Murdoch's television station in the United States of America that completely contradicts the evidence of our own eyes and ears.
Yes, I mean, everything about it. I'm actually going to run a whole chunk of this tonight on American Week during Tom Swarbrick's programme. But everything about the presentation of this is alternative facts. And it's not just what's going on Fox, James. It's what is tumbling from the president's mouth. Yes. It has been hard this week to identify a single truth that actually emerged from the president's mouth. I mean, back in the first term, alternative facts were kind of vying with real facts in the president's vocabulary, and it was always very uncomfortable. The real facts have absolutely evaporated now from Donald Trump's speeches. We saw that rambling appearance on the first anniversary of his return to the Oval Office at the White House. We then saw the speech in Davos. Both of those appearances absolutely littered with falsehoods, including even the claim that Greenland is part of North America. It's our territory, a completely false telling of the history of Greenland during the Second World War, in which Donald Trump appears to have convinced himself that President Trump, that the United States owned Greenland.
Yeah, I heard that.
By the time the Second World War was over, and then made a mistake and granted it back to Denmark, and he's simply trying to correct that historical mistake. But the lies go way beyond that. In the Davos speech, he talked about how the Chinese were terrific at making windmills, building windmills, and selling them to European nations, but you don't find any windmill farms in China itself. In fact, China produces 3 times more energy through wind and windmill farms than the United States of America. On Air Force One last night, he was talking about Americans' 401k retirement funds. And he was claiming that during the last year, they had risen between 80 and 90%, and actually claimed that in some cases they had risen by 100%. The actual number, the average increase in an American's 401k retirement fund since Donald Trump returned to the White House, 9.6%. So there are no facts. There are simply no facts that are being presented by him, that are being presented by his White House, by men like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, who did not even try to conceal their disdain and hostility towards Mark Carney, towards European governments in Davos this week. And there are certainly no facts emanating from the plethora of propaganda outlets now in the United States that tell Americans that Donald Trump is the greatest president this country has ever known.
I mean, it is, again, I worry about Groundhog Day for people listening, but it is almost impossible to grasp the scale of what has already happened and what is underway. But I suppose we should reflect upon the fact that it didn't have to be like this. Jack Smith, former special counsel to the Justice Department and investigating Donald Trump's attempts to steal the 2020 election, was giving evidence yesterday in Congress. The Democratic representative Zoe Lofgren asked him about some of the stuff that was motivating that investigation, and this was his response.
In terms of the grand jury testimony that's now been released, The fact that Donald Trump, according to Senator Graham, would believe that Martians stole the election, what does that tell you about Trump's state of mind?
That statement is consistent with what we found in our investigation, in that our investigation revealed that Donald Trump was not looking for honest answers about whether there was fraud in the election. He was looking for ways to stay in power. And when people told him things that conflicted with him staying in power, he rejected them, or he chose not even to contact people like that who would know if the election was done properly in the state. On the other hand, when individuals would say things that would allow him to stay in power, no matter how fantastical, he would latch onto those. That pattern, over time, we felt was powerful evidence that he, in fact, knew that the fraud claims he was making were false.
It feels like a dispatch from a different universe now.
I was just going to say, it feels like an archaeological relic.
Yeah.
I mean, and not just Mr. Smith, but the entire process, the entire proceeding. And I mean, Jack Smith is, I think personally, he said yesterday in testimony that he believes that he is personally at risk of being indicted by the Department of Justice because President Trump has told the Attorney General Pam Bondi to go after him. I mean, I think that Jack Smith is a complicated figure for many Americans because it is hard to argue that the Merrick Garland-run Department of Justice under President Joe Biden was entirely pure as the driven snow. Clearly, it was nothing compared to the mire that Donald Trump has created at the Department of Justice by piercing and terminating its traditional but not constitutionally guaranteed independence. But listening to that and watching it yesterday, it's what we all know. Donald Trump absolutely... Yeah.
And I like that point about Merrick Garland, because even with partisanship and politicking, there was once, not long ago, ground upon which all people could agree. There were behaviours or transgressions that would bring united condemnation. And it's hard to forget, I beg your pardon, it's easy to forget that January the 6th did that. I mean, people who are now bending the knee for Donald Trump responded very strongly to that event. He became briefly persona non grata, but the other thing that Smith reminded us of was the impact of the pardons that Trump began to enact before he'd even got his backside through the door of the White House for the second time.
The people who assaulted police officers and who were convicted after trial, in my view, and I think in the view of the judges who sentenced them to prison, are dangers to their community. As you've mentioned, some of these people have already committed crimes against their communities again, and I think all of us, if we're reasonable, know that there's going to be more crimes committed by these people in the future. I do not understand why you would mass pardon people who assaulted police officers. I don't get it. I never will.
The spell's not going to break, is it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we're on an inevitable trajectory here, and while it does sound like Groundhog Day, it's also changing.
It's getting worse and worse.
It's advancing,
yeah, of course.
And we're moving further and further away from any possibility of reverting to the America that we all grew up knowing. I mean, even in the space of a week, James, remember, I think it was back on Monday, we were talking about the Prime Minister saying that he wanted to have a calm discussion with President Trump, that we need to find a solution over Greenland that is rooted in partnership, facts, mutual respect, and alliances. I mean, all of that's gone out of the window in 96 hours. So we're just moving down an absolutely devastating dark tunnel with not a chink of light at the end of it. Again on Air Force One last night, he started musing right at the end of his exchange with reporters about the midterm elections in November. He said a couple of times, he didn't say this last night, but he's already said a couple of times, I don't even know why we have to have elections in November. Then the White House says that's facetious. He's joking. Last night was the beginning of a new narrative. He started saying, presidents always lose midterm elections. Only twice in 50 years, he claims, has a president ever won a midterm election, which, of course, is a misunderstanding anyway, because presidents aren't running in midterm elections. They are really a referendum on a president's performance, but that's the only link to the president. But there's something percolating away in the back of his mind about these midterm elections. He said last night, you'd have to get a psychiatrist to come and explain why, you know, people turn against a governing party in midterm elections. We've got to watch that space because there's something going on.
And we will rely upon you to keep that watching brief for us. Simon Marks joining Tom Swarbrick later today with even more detail on what has been going on during this, well, I said it at the top of the show, didn't it? If you didn't understand why it's a Chinese curse to wish upon people that they lived in interesting times, well, you know now.